So you're majorly confused and you don't know what to do, and you need a little aid to get those decisions made. You know where to go, it's the one and only show, Major Confusions. Ding.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dina, and welcome to the Intertwined podcast by Major Confusions, where we demystify how impactful and sustainable careers are built in the real world. This episode is one of my favorites, where we hear Gunraj's story from rising up the career ladder in one of the best law firms in London to setting up his own law practice in a way that aligns with his values and lifestyle goals. Instead of chasing after fancy titles and more money, Gunraj asks himself questions like, what truly looks like a life well lived? Do I really want to end up where the seniors in my organizations are? The answer was no. He asks, how can I intentionally design my life such that I can work hard, but also enjoy work, give time to my family, and to my overall well-being? You'll hear a story of difficult questions, constant reflections, and how life's highs and lows can be truly teaching moments. It's amazing to see how once Gunraj started to take ownership of his choices and accepted some compromises of living a more intentional life, he felt more content with his career and his choices. Hard work, but that's what it takes. I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get started. Hi, Gunraj. How are you?
Good, thanks, Tina.
Thanks for being here with me today. I'm really excited to actually hear your story. I'll get to ask you a lot of questions to that led you to who you are today. The first question I always ask is, what did you want to be when you grow up?
I wanted to be a pilot.
No way.
Very clear. Yeah, it was kind of the thing that caught my attention. Was seeing aircraft and just that sense of being able to have that responsibility. So it was my clearest sort of memory or focus of that's what I want to be.
What about it made you want to be a pilot?
I mean, it's so interesting now because my older boy re-fired that interest. So you forget about it in life, and I've contemplated that question. I think it was just that sense of freedom. You're kind of just completely free. You're in the sky. Adventure. You're going somewhere, and it's miraculous, isn't it, to think that as a species, like we can be in this country right now, and we could get on somewhere and be in a completely new culture, new environment. And I think it's just that excitement of being able to actually do that. It's something very dear to my heart. Now I see my older boy have that interest.
Oh, that's so fascinating. It's funny that you say that. Whenever people ask me what animal would you want to be, I would always want to be a bird for these reasons, but it never crossed my mind to be a pilot, the human form of that. What were you like in school, earlier in your life?
So school, kind of early stages. I think it's interesting having asked that first question, because I think very quickly I sort of narrowed myself, partly through home experiences, partly through I think the traditional kind of educational system of kind of getting you to be like, okay, you do this and this. So I was very sort of studious in the sense I will follow direction, but I was also very troubled in the sense that I would get frustrated with things. And I think the frustration really bore down to almost now you can look back, kind of that spirit, that creativity, that curiosity kind of being quashed, or I guess me thinking or feeling like that needed to happen. So, I became very studious, I became very kind of focused, but I think I lost a lot of just that childlike sense of curiosity and adventure that you kind of started off with in terms of what I wanted to be and what I was interested in doing. So, I think I kind of struggled in that sense to find that identity in the world, especially in those early years of schooling.
At what point do you feel like you started losing that sense of curiosity that you mentioned, the childlike curiosity?
Very interesting, because I think it was very early. I would say, almost like my later experience in life have had to really peel back. That it was I'd almost say instantaneously, like from having these thoughts or feelings of like seeing an aircraft and wanting to be it. to then suddenly finding myself in like a nursery environment or a schooling environment, and you very quickly are just looking at everybody around you, and they're all sort of following order. They're all wearing a uniform. They're all doing those things. And so I think I almost didn't realize that that former self, or that former identification I had in terms of that interest, that curiosity, actually even existed. I almost just thought, well, that's just kind of who I am. And, it's like you get something wrong and it's like, well, there's something wrong with you. And, you get something right. It's like, oh, great, you feel good. So I think it was very early on that kind of area went, and I was into kind of a mode of just performing and conforming, really.
So fascinating. And I find it curious how school ends up kind of, sometimes for some people, me including, kind of silencing that childhood curiosity, and then you start conforming to what it's like to succeed in school. It's not the same in the real world. At what point do you feel like you realized that there was a shift? I think for me, it came really later on that I realized that part of me was silenced. At what point did you realize, like, oh, that sense of curiosity has been quiet?
I think, it's funny you asking that question now, because actually, I have to say, when I first started dating my wife, or now wife, girlfriend at the time, because I just had so much fun. Like, we used to just go to random places, do sort of, like, say, random things, but things that were outside of that world of performing. I didn't even have an intention of her being a girlfriend or being a wife. It was just, we would just hang out and it would be cool. And I used to just talk to her forever and a day, about probably nothing, but everything. And, so it was sort of realizing there's this other human being that has that, and you without being conscious of it, I'm so interested in this person because actually they've been living from that space. And to them, that was very normal, just to like, oh, okay, you want to go camping. Now, she grew up in Kenya, so we'll go camping this weekend, or we'll go to the northern Kenya, or we'll just, lie in bed all day, or just, whatever took her and her family's kind of fancy became, that was normal. And, I found this on later on because I kept on asking the questions, as I'm sure why, and the more you ask that, you start to realize, oh, okay, what was the differences in our childhood? What were the differences in education views? What's the differences in work experience? And so, yeah, when she came into my life, it was almost like she, funny enough, almost obliged me to look at that aspect of myself. I think that's what really started bringing out things that initially identified as not being me. I was like, well, who's this guy? And I used to sort of ping back and almost criticize him for doing something that was outside of ordinary. And then later on found, oh my God, this was actually who I was always. And now seeing kids, you get another reflection of that, because you see things and you smile. You're like, why am I smiling? It's like, well, because that's what I was like. So yeah, it's sort of the wife, and then an extension of that, and then owning that more now in my day-to-day life, in my career and work. It's so fascinating how everything just starts to then align, really, I guess, in some ways.
Yes, I'm so curious. I want to follow through, like, the initial stages when, okay, you started to conform. What did Gunraj then look like, and how did that evolve to today? So I guess, what were you like in school, in terms of your academic interests and so on?
So yeah, when you ask that initial question, what was he like? I'd say very stressed, like very
Yeah.
anxious, worried, stressed, like waking up every day being like, oh God, like this is going to be hard, right? And you're aware of mindset, mindset's everything, and you reflect, you're like, well, if you're going to start your morning getting out of bed with, oh God, what's going to happen? You're naturally already sort of focusing on attracting all the things that can go wrong. And then inevitably you'll reflect on a day and say, well, all those things have gone wrong. So every day just seemed to be like a battle and a struggle, and a battle and struggle just to keep up with what I thought that identity meant, which is, performing, so,
Yeah.
and we all know what this is like, right? We can perform and say what he says and pats you on your back and says, oh, you're great, right? You're doing really well. And internally you're completely the opposite, yet because you keep hearing those messages, you keep on carrying on thinking nothing's wrong. And we see this obviously now in the world of work as well. People will get bonuses, and they'll get money, and it's like, okay, you look great on the outside, because you keep trying to train yourself to say it's fine, but internally you're something completely different. And that's really what happened to me. I sort of had that, that real stress burnout phase at, once I qualified as a lawyer, because that facade couldn't hold up anymore. I had too many things happening in my life. I just got engaged. I was, the pressure of being a lawyer as a newly qualified. So when that sort of switch point happened, and it's inevitably what happens with a lot of people, they kind of hit that darkest moment, that darkest hour, and then suddenly you sort of see the different identities, and that was kind of really my turnaround at that lowest point, where it was almost like I knew this wasn't who I was, but I somehow had to piece together who I was.
And how did you go about doing that?
So initially it was 2.5 weeks as an inpatient of psychiatric, basically private hospital. So, fortunately, having worked in the industry I did, we had private health, and we had, good support. Even at that time, there's probably a lot more psychological support, but there was still good psychological support at that point. And you look now at a lot of things that happened in childhood which didn't get picked up, which I think now would have done, which included, seeing a child psychologist at 5 or 6, which now would have hit an alarm bells, I think, to certain people at that point. It was just, he goes in to see somebody with his parents, yet there's a lot of that challenge, and they're sitting in the same room, and, there isn't you're not able to deal with these things. So you can see a lot of untracked things that led to that point of which, basically I was at kind of the lowest of the low. And, there was a fantastic consultant there who initially had seen me and said, all right, if you go out and do these things, but if you ever get to a really, really tough point and you feel it's just too much, then come in. And that point was, and I don't want to scare viewers, I don't want to be too grave and specific about it, but I do want to sort of emphasize that one can be at a certain point in their life, but still use that as a strength. I was, at the end point in terms of suicidal ideology. I was, going down. In fact, the switch point was I'd gone down steps of a train station, and I had committed myself to say, right, I'm going to jump in front of a train. And I stood at the edge of the platform, and the first train came, and I couldn't get myself to do it. The second train came, and I couldn't get myself to do it. And then that psychiatrist's voice came to me, and I just remember hearing those words of, like, if you ever find yourself in trouble, come back here. And it's so funny what kind of care and love and attention, because actually now I reflect back, it was that consultation I had with her where I could really feel that love, I could feel that connection, that support, and that came to me. And I remember going in, and I saw her as soon as the receptionist, checked me in. I remember going to her office, and she just smiled, like this really warm smile, and almost like, I'm so glad you're here. And she said, we're going to look after you. And I completely trusted in what she said, and spent, actually, when I reflect, incredible sort of 2.5 weeks. I mean, you meet all sorts of people that you deem are more successful than you. I'm into football, and I met like the assistant manager of one of the biggest football clubs there. And I was like, what the hell is this guy doing here? And suddenly you start reframing. You're like, well, that's kind of what I deemed as success. Yeah, he's also at this low point. And, you're with all of these different people, and outsidely super successful, and you're like, internally they're like you, and suddenly you don't feel so bad. So, oh, okay, you're feeling the same way. And that 2.5 weeks really was kind of that reset point, in a sense I could start to understand my own psychology better, using CBT, using a bit of that time mindfulness, which I ended up going a lot more in depth. But I started to be able to decipher, okay, there's this thing called the mind, there's this thing called a brain that operates, and kids should be learning how to operate this thing because it's our entire life, right? But you realize you don't, and you're picking up on things, and you don't know how to handle it. But when I could start to get those tools, then I could start to unravel that self that had been created through fear and through experiences, and actually start to become more centered and real with myself as to who I am and who I truly am. So feel like it's been a bit of a ramble, but I thought it was important to give some context, because sometimes one sees each other on a podcast or in a situation, they really seem really comfortable. It's comfortable. They've got, confident, and they've got it all together. And it's like, we all know it's not the reality. Anybody that is successful in whichever way they deem have gone through struggle, have gone through pain. So I think it's really important that people know that wherever they are listening from, that they kind of sense that it's normal to find it difficult. It's normal to struggle with certain things, but we're all here to try and use our experiences to help in some way. And that's kind of the prime purpose of really what I'm trying to communicate in whichever way I can.
Exactly. And thank you. I mean, I'm really grateful for your psychiatrist for the support, because I'm really grateful to know you. I mean, having been working together for the last year in many different ways, I'm very grateful that you got that support.
Yes.
And I agree with you. I mean, I think that's kind of the point of this podcast, is like, success can be defined in many different ways, and showing that success in our definition, or getting to that, requires a lot of pain. And I mean, it's part of the journey, and it's never perfect, and it's continuous iterations of, I mean, some days we feel great and some days we feel not so great. And I think the idea of getting there, I feel is there's nowhere to get to. Like, it's just, we're never there, and new pains will arise and new problems will come. And I think it's all part of that journey.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that and just being honest with it. How was your recovery after that part of your life? How did it, getting that support and going back into the real world, grappling with these multiple identities and redefining success for you, how did that come about?
I mean, very, very, I think you were very accurate in the way you described it. It's not that you suddenly have these experiences and you don't find things challenging, and you don't, continue to face those ups and downs, but, it's suddenly you have an awareness of things, and you're aware that, you are reacting to certain things. It's not the situation, but it's your reaction. And that reaction is based on past experiences, and you can start to then, almost detach, not in a, you're not living and you're not engaged with it, but detach yourself from the experience being the stressor, and start to recognize that it's an internal process. And the more I started to build that little bit of awareness, the more I could start to see, okay, like, earning money in this way is not giving me satisfaction. I might have still have earned the money, I might still have bought the thing, but I was then starting to realize, okay, that model, like, now I've been through a big experience, and now I'm sort of almost coming back and I'm retesting certain those things, weren't giving me that same level of, survival instinct. And so it was then a kind of an iterative process of saying, okay, I don't quite fit in with that model. I don't quite fit in that model. A lot of myths, I think, were also, I guess, destroyed at that point. I think particularly around, and I'll say this for sort of men, and sort of the word vulnerable. So like being, and I reframe it to be honest. Like when I'm having this conversation with you, someone can say, oh, you're being really vulnerable because you talked about what you've experienced. And I'm like, no, it's just being honest, about where I've been and how it's got me to where I am. And I think the more I was starting to be honest as well, in terms of even some professional settings that were never talked, and things were never talked about, I started to find the proposed reactions were very different to what I thought they were. And I have to say, the company I was working at, and I went back to, and I had to sort of transition back to, were really, really good in terms of the way that they handled me. And again, I don't want to be very gender specific or try and be, sort of blanket with statements I'm going to make, but my team was predominantly women. And in fact, I was reflecting on this, don't know why, just before I came on this podcast, but the most senior partner was actually also female. And yet they were, for the area that I was practicing, the best, like nationally, tier one, every single benchmark consistently well. And I was reflecting on that before I came. I was like, how were they so brilliant at what they did? In fact, I was speaking to a colleague yesterday, 14 years ago, I was working at this place, and he to this day is now a partner of a very established firm. And he says, I still have certain notes from the time at that firm that I used that carry me to this day. And I was like thinking, how is it? And I was, looking at that, the cultural aspect to care, yet you still had that sense of honesty. It was like, if you didn't perform, like, you were told. But it was always done with that element of care. And I think when I reflected on certain things around, how many female board members should there be, how many, I think it's, look, we don't like tokenism, but I think I really appreciate, it's like working with you, I really appreciate working with women because they have a natural caring energy that comes across. And I try and apply it to myself, because we're all, men or women, have both sort of energies within, but I was really conscious of how important that is, and how important that was to my own acceptance to come back into that environment and feel that care. You look back now and you weren't as conscious at the time, but actually feel that care, and actually almost using that experience to get even better in my work, because I had now better ability to manage emotions, I had better ability to focus, I knew more of where my limits were on a psychological level. So it's quite amazing when you think you were out of work for a period, and transitioning was another, probably 2-3 months. It was probably 4, 5, maybe even longer that I was actually out of a job that demands so much. Yet I was tooled in an even better way to take my career on. To heights that if you had asked me then, I would have achieved. I would have thought were impossible. But that new tooling gave me those tools to make choices. Say, well, I want to try this. I want to do that. We started off talking about that curiosity and that adventure. I just had that little thing coming back to me, and each time I was able to do a bit more of it, I was like, I love this, and I fell more and more in love with that, to the extent where it started to become my norm, and it's kind of now how I guess I live.
And what tools are you referring to in that case?
So my primary, I guess, has been mindfulness. You can sort of mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness is the more Western newer word to meditation, and very simply, it's just meditation is being aware of what you're experiencing in any given moment. And the beauty about the practice, if you call it that, or what it is, it's not just about, people have a preconception, it's about going off somewhere and sitting in silence for long periods on end. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely brilliant, and I've done a week of that, but it's more about how you do that day to day. And so I'm very consistent with, I'll sit for a period every day, but I'll also take walks out in nature, which will be a mindfulness practice. Even when I'm engaged in dialogue, I seek that as so. That was, at the time I was in hospital, not as well recognized, I guess, as kind of being effective. Now there's a lot of science and neuroscience that proves its effectiveness, but that is the principal tool that I would say, because it's innate. It's completely free. You don't need a psychologist. You don't need to do anything, and it's incredibly effective. When you can separate yourself from your experience, and then you can start to see, oh, okay, this is happening, and I don't have to follow that fear or that thought. I can let it go, and actually I can still commit to what I want to do today and what I want to achieve. And so when I was able to really utilize that and follow my own direction, it just gives you the confidence that anything can happen in a day, but you've got that ability to navigate past those fears, past those however number of millions of distractions we now live in the age. And I think it's why it's, for me, so important that everybody always has some sort of self-awareness practice, because otherwise, in the world we're in now, you just get washed with social media, with everything else that goes on. And so, yeah, I'm grateful I had that time to build that and be able to kind of have it with me as I go through life, really.
I love that. If you were going to recommend to a person that has heard about mindfulness meditation, but has always been kind of scared, I was that until maybe earlier this year. What could you recommend someone to kind of get started to understand in a very simple way to establish that kind of mindfulness practice? Because I know you're big on mindfulness.
Yeah, I like structure, as you know, but I think everybody who wants to try it, who's not, it is trying to commit to a period of 4 weeks. And when you asked me that question, the best resource I found, but it was also where I started my journey, was there's a guy called Dr. Mark Williams, and he was based at, I don't know his current, this was going back, he was sort of based at the Oxford Institute of Mindfulness, but he'd also created, and I love evidence, right? I mean, that's my professional background. So he had done studies and he'd created the first mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy program. So it was actually like an NHS prescribed, scientifically backed program. And he wrote a fantastic book. It's probably changed now in iterations, maybe, but it was called Finding Peace in a Frantic World. And you're nodding, so I don't know if you've read it or you have experienced it. But yeah, for beginners, it's a brilliant, accessible, easy to use resource because it gives you some of the theory, but important thing, you've got to practice it. And at the time, it had recordings with it, I think by CD. I'm sure it's now been updated, but yeah, for anybody, there's that, and there's another great I say author, but there's two others, and I could go on this for hours, but two others are people want a variety. Or three, because I'll add a lady in there that I know is also very good. But there's a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, US based, and he has a very famous quote, which was, I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but we can't control the waves, but we can learn how to surf. So, i.e., we're always going to experience the waves of emotions, of fear, of loss, of whatever. And so you'll never stop those waves, right? You can go in a sea, you're going to constantly get crashed, but actually you can learn how to surf. And for me, that's the great apt quote for like, what is mindfulness? It's like, it doesn't stop anything in life happening, but it gives you that tool to like be on a surfboard. And so he's, again, quite accessible. And then the other third male I'll give, who I trained under to do my teaching course, was a guy called Jack Kornfield, in the US as well. And I love him because he was a psychologist by background, and then he went and studied Buddhism in the East and came back, and he was the first one to bring mindfulness really from the East to the West and through America. And then Tara Brach, for anybody that's wants something more female, again, I got introduced to her when I did my teaching course because she did it with Jack. And she's got a lovely way of bringing in practices in a really, again, accessible way. And she has some quite cool informal tools. So, as I said, I could probably go on about this for hours because I've got so many different resources. But I think for anybody wanting to start, I would definitely think Dr. Mark Williams, and then the others I think have different nuances that could become interesting for them if they wanted.
Thank you. I love that. I am nodding because that's how I started as well. My therapist recommended finding peace in a frantic world. And I also love structure, so that really worked for me. I knew I had this program to complete, and it got me into it. And you can see yourself getting better. So yeah, I would also highly recommend that. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Good.
I want to go back to earlier, just to kind of going back to, how did you end up studying law? You wanted to become a pilot, and then just how did you end up studying law?
Yeah, it was interesting you asked the question that way, because actually, whilst I initially was saying I kind of lost that curiosity during education, I guess I still had a curiosity. Like I found law intriguing, and I found, as a lot of lawyers do, they kind of see some sort of ideology of, I'm here to, support the good guys and to, do whatever. And I had some, kind of think of human rights, and, I don't know, just had this sense of trying to help with justice in some ways. And I was fortunate in actually, I had such curiosity that I moved schools after GCSE, because one school in the area actually offered an A-level in law, and I was curious. I was like, I'd be cool to study that. So I actually moved schools, and I studied law A-level, which is not that common. And in doing that, I was like, this is really quite cool. And then I was like, well, I'm studying it. What would it be like to study it further at university? And so it was never really a plan of this is what I'm going to end up doing. It was just that curiosity, and then just followed each train into actually going into the profession more formally. But yeah, it was just in some ways it was that sense of curiosity of like, what is this about, and how could I perhaps help in some way in terms of being able to use that law.
Did you have any influences around you, from family, school, around your educational choices?
No, that was sort of a funny thing. It was only it was only later when I sort of was studying law and looking at it more seriously that my dad at the time said, "Oh, his dad, so that's my grandfather, always said he wanted a lawyer in the family, and there wasn't one. So I was sort of I was the first and only in the entire sort of extended family, which in our cultures, I mean, it's quite a big thing in the sense of you're doing something different. Everybody else, went into whatever they went to banking and various things, and so yeah, there was no influence. Absolutely, I think it became a thing because it was quite well esteemed. So it became a thing from the family perspective when it was something like, oh, okay, like he's actually going to become a lawyer. And it's like, oh, wow, look at this guy. He's incredible. Where previously you were sort of, just ignored, and now you're sort of maybe to the surprise of parents, I don't know, I've suddenly become this esteemed professional. But there was no like, you should be doing X, Y, or Z. It was my own volition and my own drive, I guess, in some ways that made it what it was.
Did it meet your expectations of what it actually was when you were actually studying it in university?
I didn't, to be honest, I didn't really have much expectation, in the sense I had studied the A level and I was aware that it was going to be very different. And I disliked the actual studying I loved uni as an experience, but as a degree, I disliked it with a passion. It was just, it's so heavy. Obviously, like, it's going to be text heavy, but the size of these books, and unlike the real world, you sort of had to regurgitate a lot of this information. So, your basis of your qualification or your ability was just literally granted on, what acts could you recall, what, cases could you recall. And I just found it, I guess I always had a sense of awareness of some level, maybe through some work experience I had, that this was in no way what the real world was in terms of the practice of it. You would have statutes to hand, you would have cases to hand. Look at the world now; it has completely shifted. But I was always aware you didn't need to know that off the top of your head. What you did need to know is, what does somebody want and need, and how do you shape and understand what the law is to support or discredit, if you want to use that word, but go against that. So yeah, I think I struggled with my engagement in the degree because I knew on some level it wasn't relevant to what I would end up doing.
If someone younger is asking you, like, should I study law or should I not, how would you try to approach that question with them?
I think I would very much say, like, what is your interest and what's your goal? Because for me, I was not somebody who enjoyed studying for the sake of studying or enjoyed learning for the sake of learning, unless it had application. So if you want to study lots of text and you want to regurgitate, and I don't know, there's something about that interests you, then I think fine. But you've also got to be aware that's not going to employ you. Like, you're not going to get work through that process. But if it's something you enjoy doing and you've got some way of reconcile economics with it, then I think it's fine. And I often have younger, either young qualified lawyers, or they're looking to enter the profession, or they're sort of in the training, and they will approach it. And I'm always asking the question, like, why are you doing this? That's the thing is, and the typical answer I even started getting into, some people, the money is great, and it's like, well, that's not going to sustain you, and there's hundreds of millions of ways of earning money. And found out the other day, in a very posh area near where we live, the person who's just bought a brand new £3.5 million house as a YouTuber. So he's he's earning a lot more than to be able to pay cash for that. He's earning a lot more than a lot of lawyers. So when people give me the reason, money, I said, why don't you just create some fancy TikTok video, or spend your hours doing that, because you may earn a lot. You probably would earn a lot more money if you get that right. So I think certainly looking back at my younger self then, I'd be saying the same thing, because at a certain point, I think I got caught a little bit in that trap and I lost my why. I was like, well, the money's good. And what was I comparing it to? Because I remember at one point I challenged myself and figured out that I would have got paid more as a bouncer at a nightclub per hour than I would as a lawyer, because of the hours I was doing. So I kind of challenged my own I can't really swear, but own rubbish in that sense as well. So yeah, very much comes back to your why, doesn't it? And I think that's really what I asked myself, and and therefore it's easy to ask other people whenever they're asking me for opinion and of kind of career directions, I guess.
For sure. How did your why evolve, kind of starting off as a lawyer and then continuing your journey as a lawyer?
I guess I would say it kind of became more refined and clearer, and that's partly out of necessity because I sort of became, self-employed, and so you kind of have to be able to express this. Whereas, when you're working, you kind of get away with just doing what you're kind of told and doing what's expected. And when I left the sort of London, I decided to take a tangential approach to Kenya, and that really came from, say from a heart space, a curiosity, a feeling of something that's beyond intellect in terms of what could I do there, what could I support with, and having gone out there and again worked for the best law firm and qualified there, I realized that never came about through like an exam or an application. It literally just came from a connection to my sense of using my experiences to serve a greater purpose, communicating that, and people saying, that's brilliant, and we want to help it. And in some ways, it's not ideology to say, it was all again then for some, fantastic altruistic need. In the first case, it was somebody he had a huge, legal practice and he wanted help with it. But I was able to connect to my why, and then I was able to, have any touch points with people within that from that space. And I realized that was the energy that was sustaining me. And I just became more conscious of, what that was, and that curiosity, that, helpfulness, that desire to support, a desire to be honest. So, the number of people that I would, do it now, even self-employed, it's like, you ask me to do some work and it's like, no, I'm not the best place for that. And I pass it on, and actually seeing a whole reframe of the world of what we call commerce and business, from a place of truth and honesty, actually being energizing for me, but actually then starting to be sustainable from a financial perspective. And I feel that's kind of been my journey particularly since I went to Kenya, and then I've sort of come back and decided, I guess, I couldn't identify with that old existence of the big London law firms and that culture. And so it became a case of, okay, how do I operate now without these big shiny buildings, without a sense of their why? And I had to make me have to be very conscious about developing my own why. What was so interesting about when you do that process, having read got a number of books from business guys to spiritual guys to everybody else, you start to look at other people and say, wow, they're incredible, they're inspirational. And that's all well and good, and that can help, but actually ultimately inspiration is within. And it's that kind of constant approach of asking, why am I doing this? And often it's like, why is something de-energizing me? Why is something energizing me? And you start to figure out it's because you love that, you enjoy that, it gives you something that's coming from inside, and you then focus more on that. And so it's never an end point, like you said earlier, but it's that awareness that enables you to, I guess, keep connecting back to that why and communicating from that, both internally and with people you speak to.
Yeah. And like because I know sticking to your why and sticking to your values, you said like being true to yourself and being honest with yourself. How or what gives you the courage to kind of always come back to that? Because it's also easy to be swayed with like the world of business, commerce, just like, okay, you're in a big city like London, I can go make a lot of money and continue. How do you stick to your values in these cases?
Well, I'm going to use the word accountability, and accountability for someone or some beings beyond yourself. And I think, consistently when I read a lot of what I term as successful business people, they'll sort of say whatever they were doing was beyond themselves, or beyond their own ego, beyond their own, and I've got two boys. And I say that, two boys, because they're looking up to me as a male figure. And, the thing I realized, particularly when the first one was born, is just, born of pure love. He was pure abundance. I mean, he was sort of on some level, again, my sort of one of my biggest sort of spiritual awakenings was suddenly you start realizing the truth about life. And the question, will always get asked of me, or I'll ask myself, what do I want my kids to be? And the automatic answer, most parents will want my kids to be happy.
Yeah.
And so you realize, well, from your own experiences, what did you model? Well, I modeled, my father, I modeled other male, and a lot of those were not happy. And so you can talk about saying you want your kids to be happy, but ultimately, if you're not happy, they're going to know that. And so the ability I have to stay on track is knowing every single moment that I'm in their presence, they're looking at their dad as a model for that. So when I've been tempted at just taking the money, or doing things which my ego is saying I should, I constantly kind of ask the question to say, okay, if my child was in that situation, then they came to me with that problem, which I'm sure they will at some point in their life. Like, how do I answer it if I've not lived it? Because I can't say to them, "Will you follow your heart? Don't take that opportunity if it doesn't feel good." And I'm just there, and I've taken the money and I've run. So you're going to get tempted with those things in life, and you're going to get tests of succumbing to some of the things that are more widely accepted. But it's kind of constantly having that conversation with yourself as to, well, how do you have this conversation with your child or your children? I've got two, because no doubt they will come up in their life.
I love that. It's just holding yourself accountable. I mean, they're kind of holding you accountable. You're just you know that at some point you'll be asked these questions, and you want to be honest with them.
Right.
How did you grapple with this identifying with like big law firms to becoming your own self-employed lawyer? Because it's usually easy to lean on that, like big names and all of that, and then suddenly becoming on your own. I think a lot of identity questions probably would come up.
I think it's very much almost a process by which you're trying to fight the system or systems. So, I'd go into these companies and I'd be like, why are they like this? Why are they like that? And you sort of find yourself getting agitated. And then when you start to realize this, and, there could be people listening to this that work for big law firms, they love it because, it's almost like there's a ship, right? And you realize there's a captain of that ship, and there's a lot of people in there, and it's going in a certain direction, right? And it's sailing, but for me, like, it's going in a different direction. So to a lot of people, like, they want to be part of that ship. They're not bothered about, say, being a captain. They're quite happy to be part of it. They like the experience. They like what it gives them. And, 100% that, you should stay there. But it's where you start finding yourself, as I did, on ships that you're like, I don't want to go in this direction. I don't like the environment of this. It was like you were realizing, well, you've got to get in your own boat. And, at times you might have to be on your own a little bit, and it's going to be hard because you're going to face those waves. You're going to face everything on your own. And there's some comfort no matter what in that big ship, because you kind of feel like you've got support, even though people aren't really content, but there is a feeling that you're together in the rubbish, right? In those tides. Whereas I came to that realization at a certain point that if I keep feeling the same way, there's something that my body is communicating. And so I just kind of have to be in that process of basically being in the boat, falling into the waves. I mean, like I gave that analogy earlier of John Kabat-Zinn, because I knew how to surf. I knew I could jump in the water and it'd be fine. I'll get back up, and I could jump and I can get back up. And eventually, sort of now, I kind of probably say, okay, I've got a little boat and it's got kind of a sail, and that's cool. It's not big, it's not fancy, but it's my boat, and I know where it's going, and I only speak to people that I think are right for that boat to come on, that I can serve, and are right for that boat to kind of help support its structure in some ways. And having gone through that process a number of times and made a huge number of mistakes in that, they were all for that reason, to be able to understand what that boat meant for me, and now being able to kind of be on it comfortably, realize, like anything, economics are challenging, external factors are challenging, but because I know what my boat is and I'm leading it, it's like it will carry on going, and it will get stronger.
Yes. What type of mistakes have you made that makes this boat stronger? Like, what learnings have you had over the last few years being on your own boat?
So I think you mentioned the sort of identity aspect of the larger, kind of grappling with this whole aspect of identity, particularly from the larger, let's call it, multinational, whatever you want to term them, and then sort of going to create my own identity. And what I found was when I kind of knew, okay, I didn't want to be part of these large operations, I want to set up my own. I still looked at that as success metrics. So I still looked at everything that I did there, everything they did there, and thought, okay, well, if I want to have my own boat, I need to make sure it looks like that to get people that are jumping on that, i.e. clients and being serviced by it, to come to me. And so I spent, got an exorbitant amount of money on, like a website and fancy business cards and, profiles and, all of these things, because I thought I had to have that to attract people. Whereas then what ended up happening is I was almost attracting the people I didn't want. And in lots of cases, I would maybe attract them. Then they'll come to me and say, but why would we just not go to the big ship? It's already like been made and it's got everything that it needs to sell. Like you're on your own trying to figure it out. And so I kept on going through iterations of trying to have, fancy looking things in some ways and try to be seen in the right circles and to eventually realize that, well, hang on, I'm trying to compete in a market that is not even who I am, but I get why I'm trying to do that because that's all I know. And so it was kind of that process of like trying to do what they were doing and then realizing, well, actually who I am is different. Therefore, who I'm going to attract is different. And therefore what I need to do is different, but not different in an inauthentic way, but just different in like, what do I find comfortable? And then you end up meeting people that are more similar to that who end up being then your clients because you're just the same type of people in the sense of how you view the world and how you want business to be.
It's like accepting to be true to your authentic self and like letting go.
Yes.
Yeah, that these images of success that it's a lot of unlearning, I think.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious what a day in the life looks like for you. I mean, looked like for you in like the top law firms and a day in the life right now.
Oh, wow.
Also for our listeners, because I want to make it like if someone's thinking about becoming a lawyer or being self-employed lawyer, like just to have like more insight around that.
Yeah. So I guess, one of the things I didn't probably mention earlier, which has come to me now you asked the question, is I've been quite obsessed with control in my life. So like I like to feel like I can control my life. And we all know we can't control certain things, but we can control certain things. And so what I realized the main driver to be being, self-employed in that sense has really become because I can control time. And okay, things are probably different now, even for big law in terms of flexible working. So I'm giving you my, experience of then based on probably less flexible working, but knowing the industry as I do, I don't think there's been a huge change in culture in terms of what I'm going to explain and how my day was. So I mean, I would get up, quite early. I was always conscious of some importance of self-care. So I would try and get to a gym or do some sort of physical activity before work, but that would typically mean getting on a train very early at sort of, maybe 6 o'clock, being at a gym for 7, 7:15, having a workout, shower, and then getting down, to my desk, maybe having a bit of breakfast, coffee, exorbitant amount of caffeine I used to consume then. It was kind of trying to get me, pumped for the day, I guess, in a false sense. But, the hours in those environments are brutal. And I don't think that's changed somewhat simply because no matter what one tries to say about balance and work-life balance, the reality of what they demand in terms of your time, you have to bill a certain number of hours, means you are just going to be working hours that are beyond what you would term, 9 to 5 ordinary. So my typically working day would be simply at that point, 9, 9:15, just being working till, I'd say the average would not be, earlier 7:30, often 8, 10, 12. So you quickly see how that's not sustainable from an energy perspective. So that would be an atypical day, and at least 3-4 times I'd be eating, meals in the office a week, and that obviously would impact, my relationship. And so, you start to look at a lot of these things as to what's sustainable. And it wasn't sustainable for me to have that career and wanting to have a sense of balance for my own sense, and also having, wanting to have a relationship, because, what's the point of me being a so-called partner to somebody if I'm simply not there? And so to unravel to my day now is really about not always be able to control time a lot more to create balance. So I still have the same sort of self-care routine in some ways, but I've got an added, I say challenge, but benchmark of young children. So they take energy both mornings and evenings, that I'm able to work around my life, which I wouldn't have been able to do then, right? And that's always what's distracted me from that life is, I can drop them to school, I can drop the child buttons, I can take them to activities. And so, day in the life is a combination of, being with my kids at certain times, particularly in the morning, having self-care, particularly in the morning, having solid periods of work where I'm really focused, not so much as I was then on just doing the hours, but really being clear, what's my output? What's my focus? I love a guy called Tony Robbins, who's a fantastic, again, when he was looking for other reasons in terms of, coaching aspects and different skills, he's brilliant. And one of the things, just as we're talking, I remember him talking about is what he termed RPM, so like a rapid planning method. So it's like being really clear in terms of, well, what is your output task? And it's incredible what I can achieve now in a matter of sometimes minutes or a few hours, compared to back then when I was spending 8, 10, 12 hours just bashing out documents with no real thought of what my output was, and a constant frustration because you had God knows how many emails and God knows how many things. So you would work all these hours but still feel unfulfilled because actually you had no sense of what was my output focus. Whereas now it's really, when it comes to work, it's really being clear on, okay, this is what my output is, and I get it done and I feel good about myself, generally most of the time, because I'm able to know what I'm trying to do and why I'm doing it. And if things don't go the way I planned, then I look at that as learning, and I iterate based on that. So the process is a lot more fluid and a lot more quicker, and as a result, I'm growing, almost day by day, in what I'm doing.
I love that. And yeah, it's also learning how to organize yourself while you're self-employed versus just in a company where you just need to be working ongoingly. In terms of your tasks, like as a lawyer, I mean, as a self-employed lawyer, what's the balance, I guess, in terms of like trying to find new clients? I don't know what goes into your calendar of things that needs to happen.
So yeah, it's I guess it's fluid and it's structured in the sense that we kind of know primarily, and again, this has taken a lot of work to kind of almost some ways detach myself as an individual and look at a business and say, okay, I'm providing legal services, and to provide legal services or to run a business, as you know, there are primarily 3 components. There's marketing, because you need to somehow attract clients to be able to serve them, to have anything. So there's always a component of, okay, who am I? And I use the word marketing. I've reframed a lot of the things to who do I want to listen to, who I want to connect to, who I think I can best serve. So that's what I term marketing, is listening. And I think that's a whole completely reframe. Again, the best businesses, they listen the best to clients. So my marketing is always trying to engage with the people that I think I can best serve, listening to them. And then when I can be of service, you can use the word sell, I will offer them something that I can provide them to. If I can't, like I told them afterwards, and I listen to them and I realize I can't best serve them, I'll give them to someone else that can, because I know a lot of lawyers. So it's kind of always having that sense of who are you connecting with there, who is your type of client, who are you making sure you're seeing, being front of when it comes to networks, etc. And then you look at operations, so like the actual work. So again, depending on the type of work I'm doing, it's very much driven by what the client demands are in terms of timing, outputs, etc. So this all gets factored in, and it has to be fluid according to, if someone says to me today, well, I've got this, and it could be 4 or 5 hours a day, then obviously I've got to make sure that operationally I'm factoring that time. And then the other element, which I think both marketing and this last element I'm going to talk about, lawyers atypically struggle with, because they're so used to the operational part is very comfortable, which is why they often struggle on their own in some ways, is then the financial part. So you've got the marketing, you've marketed, you brought yourself a client, you've done the work, probably easy and the really kind of fun stuff to a lot of the lawyers. And then it's like, okay, well, how to deal with the finances? When if you're VAT registered, you've got to deal with your VAT accounting, and you've got corporation tax, and you've got expenses, and then you've got to decide, well, how do you pay yourself, and how do you pay the taxes and all of that. So those elements, again, now I'm trying to bring in better people to help in these areas that I'm not so strong about and strong at, and I can't do all of it. And again, that's just the journey of you're trying to do everything, right? When you're first starting out, and you think, well, I can do that and I can do that, and you're finding your energy is going up and your energy is going down, and then you start to find, okay, what's energizing me, what's de-energizing me. There are people that find the things that de-energize you energizing, so give it to them, because they'll do it much better than you, and they'll thank you because you're giving them something in joy. And I think there's something you have to get over, because sometimes you think, oh, this is crap, and you think everybody thinks it's rubbish, whereas it's not. Like, we're all different. And so that's been the learning, is give those people those things, and then I focus things that energize me, which ultimately are going to give me the best value in terms of moving my business forward. So yeah, it's just a constant kind of having those three at your front and center of mind every day. I'm always, okay, what am I doing in the marketing realm? What am I doing if I've got the work on? How am I operating that in an effective way? And then, how are we dealing with the invoicing, the financing, the tax, all of that detail as well.
Yeah, and learning how to delegate all of that, and accepting that, okay, I could delegate things that I don't really enjoy, and others will enjoy it. And then, you'll then have the right people on the boat with you, versus just being on the boat on your own. Yeah, I remember when I first started coaching full time, I read it somewhere that being a coach is different than having a coaching business. And it's always stuck with me, because the skills you need to be a coach are really different than actually building a sustainable practice. Okay. Can I do a rapid fire round of questions?
Go for it. Yeah.
So if you were to do it again, what would you dedicate your career to?
I think still law. I love it.
I love it. That's good.
Yeah.
That's the perfect answer. That's what I hope everybody will come to, or they don't regret their career.
Yeah.
What's a very common piece of advice, career advice, that you disagree with?
A common bit of career advice that I disagree with. I think sometimes this is what I grappled with. So it's supposed to be quick fire, and I feel like I've stopped the quick fire. But it's like this: we can get obsessed with this, like, find your passion, and I think we can then get stuck into thinking there's got to be this one epiphany of something we do. And so I think I certainly relaxed when I heard something else to say, you can be like a bee, like you could just be curious, and you could do something for a bit of time, and then you can do something else, and it doesn't matter. Like, just do what you find takes your curiosity and interest at that time, and forgive yourself and allow yourself 6 months or years later to drop it and do something else. I think that would be mine. Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah.
What's the best investment you've made in yourself?
Best investment, I would say my mindfulness course, that 2-year accreditation in mindfulness, and I would say coaching.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And in one word, describe your career journey.
Adventurous.
I like that. Which aligns with curiosity as well.
Yes.
I think you need curiosity to be adventurous.
Yes.
Now I'm going to ask a selfish question out of my own curiosity. I don't even know if it aligns with the flow, but I'm going to ask it. You mentioned in the beginning that how the education kind of suppressed your curiosity, and there was a lot of unlearning to become curious again. And you reflected on how your upbringing versus your wife's upbringing influenced the suppression of curiosity. What are your findings? I'm really curious about this. I'm curious about curiosity, so I'm asking you.
It may sound like, when you're asking that, and it may sound vague and perhaps to some uncomfortable, and again, it's because I think this word has different connotations, but I'm gonna say love. And she grew up where love was just such an innate part of existence, Whereas for me, it wasn't. Like that didn't exist in our family. And yeah, what I've realized is the ability for any human being to do anything in the world comes from having that energy, I'm going to call it, or that environment of care or love. You could even say trust in some ways, but like that allowing of that being to be. And that's, I'm very conscious of this as a parent, just having that environment where the kids can shout, they can scream, they can make mistakes, they can, do things, but their innate being is constantly nurtured and loved, not because it has to or needs to, because that's what it is.
So like there's no expectations attached to the love.
Correct.
Yeah, versus you mentioned, like, can you explain a bit more?
Yeah, I guess you're highlighting exactly the difference again in my upbringing, which is why even I talked earlier about there was never a thing about law until suddenly it was like, oh, this is this really esteemed profession, and then suddenly I was like, wow, Gunraj, you're amazing. So in the context of how I was brought up, it's like you get a good grade, it's like, oh wow, you're incredible. You get into something, it's like, oh wow, incredible. You don't do so well something, so oh my god, that's terrible. And so as a being, as an individual, you think, well, I'm great, I'm loved, I'm cared for, because in reality that's all we want. We all want to be cared, we want to be loved for, and all we're ever going to do is behave in a certain way that we think we're going to get that. So in that type of environment, it's what's driven a lot of, I guess, the old school corporate culture of like, well, you do this and we'll give you a bonus and it's good, and you don't do this and you get, in fact, in a lot of big law, there was, the colors would reflect, like if you were doing billing work and if you were doing non-billing work, right? So you'd feel really bad if you were doing what they called non-chargeable. It was like a red color, right? Where you did the chargeable, it was like the green or blue, right? So these things were pinging psychologically, saying, well, we love you if you do the stuff that makes money, and we don't when we do. So you see how a lot of this stuff where I brought up is quite reflective in some ways of a mass culture. And I think, again, I'm sort of going to say, particularly as a male, it very much was like, well, okay, you do that, you get that, you get that reward, you get that. Whereas certainly my wife's upbringing and family environment was very much like, we love you for whatever you are, and as long as you sort of give your best. And the times I would see you would get upset or there would be some disagreement or frustration with the family, that was generally if she wouldn't be who she was. Like she should sort of drop the standard of who she is, not because she achieved something or didn't achieve something. And this is what I feel I've really adopted in myself, is I've got a standard for how I expect myself to behave, how I expect to try things, how I expect to do things. And I genuinely don't look at the result. If the result goes well, I say, okay, fine, that's convert. If it's not, I'm like, okay, well, I'm learning. And I give myself the credit for having the courage to try. And that's what I could, constantly say to especially my older boy now, because he's sort of turning 9, and he's now conscious of getting things wrong in tests or getting on. And I'm just like, you've just got to keep doing your best. You've just got to keep trying. And when you falter, then you learn. Last week he got half the spellings wrong. And I said, that's great. This is learning. And to see he suddenly was like, oh, okay, this is quite different to perhaps what the teacher's reaction is. And that's not criticism of them, but it's how I think we all grow and we're able to navigate and build or have what we innately are, which is resilience. We're never going to achieve anything without that resilience. And that comes just from that ability to say, okay, this is eternally who I am. I know that strength, that ability to learn, to grow, to do and adapt. And so I'm going to go out and I'm going to allow the mistakes to happen. I'm going to allow the challenges to arise, and I'm going to learn and grow from them.
I love that. I think what you said is super, super true and accurate. Like, it's a mass culture problem where in school it's like, you're great if you're hitting all your spellings right, and you're like not so good if you're making a lot of mistakes, but it's no reflection of the real world where you actually need to make mistakes. That it's also not in life, you can't really grade it on a test, and you start really suffering because it's like, okay, where's my validation here? And you need to try to find it in other ways. Yeah, thank you. That was like, yeah, that was really insightful. Now that we're coming full circle, I think we touched on that, but who are you today, and what's your why?
Who am I today and what's my why? I'll say who I am today. I don't know, I feel like this is a bit vague and a bit fluffy, but I say I am love. Like I feel that. And my why is to serve, and to serve in whatever way that takes. And we can use the word profession in one way, but that's only a small part of, who I'm here to serve, and implicitly I'm here to serve my kids. Not here to dictate or direct them. I'm just here to create the best environment for them to thrive. And it's amazing when you start thinking of that, because again, you look at the business world, and the businesses that best succeed over a long time, sustainable, they have that, right? A leader that's term servient, constantly curious, constantly looking to help the environment in which their people are. So I think it's so interesting seeing my whole full circle life and realizing that my innate why is actually how we are going to achieve what we term even worldly success. I just keep coming back to that sense of service and humility. I think that's the other thing as well, is that that why is also about continuing to be humble, and curious, and that enables me to keep serving and keep iterating.
Yeah, which goes back to the childlike curiosity that we actually start with. Last closing question. Reflecting on your journey, what do you believe is one of the most underrated skills for building a sustainable and meaningful career?
Underrated skills? I don't know, when you ask me that question, I would say practice. I would say self-compassion.
Yeah.
Because without forgiving yourself when you do make mistakes, you're not going to learn, you're not going to grow. And so I think self-compassion is the most underrated thing. Immediately something happens, we can be reactive. And I think the moment we can sort of say, okay, if it's with a colleague or with someone, okay, that's happened, that must be hard, as opposed to, God, why has that happened? And look at that first, as no human being is trying to do anything wrong. We all want to do our best. We all want to help. So I think that is the most underrated component of any success, whatever you want to term it.
It's true, being kind to ourselves, and then it allows us to be kind to others, and understanding that they too are on their own journey. Thank you, Gunraj. This was, I have a lot of love for this conversation, for giving me this time, and thank you so much. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey in some way.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and think that a friend or family member might benefit from Gunraj's experience, please share it with them. Our goal is to demystify how career decisions are made in the real world and empower others to pursue building a path towards a meaningful and sustainable life. Follow us at Major Confusions on LinkedIn for more of these episodes. Keep in mind the 3 C's: compassion, curiosity, and courage. See you next time.